So I've been trying to figure out the purpose of menopause. And because there's only 4 species that live past menopause, and we're one of them. So why would we live past menopause? And so I brought to this podcast Dr. Lisa Mosconi, who is the top brain researcher. And she brought to my attention something called the grandmother hypothesis.
Right.
Do you know this? You know this hypothesis.
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Amazing. So the way she explained it, and I've now since dove in and studied it from every angle I can find, but I'm left with a fitness question, is that it definitely, the menopausal brain is built to see more of societal needs because the grandmother needed to take care of the mother who was delivering and babies and taking care of babies and the other kids. So her brain, according to Lisa, is one that is built more towards empathy, can see things from a bigger picture. But when I dive into the science, she went out and foraged and she pulled tubers out of the ground because what Lisa says is that only 3% of the time did the gang that went out for the kill, did they actually come back with a kill? It was a very, very small amount of time. So it was actually the grandmother that was keeping the tribe alive by her ability to go and resource plants and tubers specifically. So she had to be able to bend, she had to be able to pull, she had to be able to travel. She took by foot, she took children with her that were probably 5, 6, 7 years old. So I don't think she was carrying them, but maybe she was holding their hand. So when we look at this fitness level of what the grandmother back in the primal days needed to do, I'm thinking everything you just created in the movement diet was actually what was needed for the grandmother to be able to do her job around the cave. Am I accurate on that? And do you have any thoughts on the grandmother hypothesis when it comes through the lens of movement and fitness?
Yeah, I mean, wow, there's so much there. We could do a whole episode on just this. I think there's a really great book called Mothers and Others for those who want a kind of it's not layperson, it is a book by a physical anthropologist and biologist maybe, but it really does a beautiful job of showcasing this idea. I mean, certainly, I think that we forget the contribution that, how do I want to say this? Children forage. Everyone is participating, let's just say, to the food supply. And we might even be naming things like adulthood for when you're able to create a certain level of resource. But children are making their contribution. It's sort of clumsy at first. And similarly, people who are slower than perhaps the peak producer of kilocalories would be, but everyone's contributing. Like there is there's not really hangers on, everyone is contributing in some way. I think we've got our understanding of movement in this particular culture backwards. Like I think we think of children as needing a ton of movement or children moving a lot naturally as kids. Yeah. And then by the time you become an adult, it sort of
tapers off.
Wanes. Down to like a little bit. And then when you're really older, it really trickles down to nothing. Yeah. But it's almost the opposite.
Yes,
it's
right.
almost the opposite. Your children have a lot of movement, but that volume of movement is to prepare them for the real amount of movement that they'll need to do when they are more actively producing. Now, keep in mind, this is on the spine of everyone gets tons of rest and play, right? So that's also what we're missing. We have no idea how to rest or play. We're the least rested, most undermoved population. Like we've got this crazy paradox going on where nobody's moving and nobody's rested, right? We're stuffing our eyes with intentionally things. And so, yes, but the tricky thing is I think we can't necessarily put our understanding of like the age of grandparents is going to be younger. And the age of menopause is going to be older. Right. Yeah. So we're in early menopause. I mean, menopause is a earlier time because we don't have 14 pregnancies or, so the more children you have, that's right. So we are in an earlier menopause. Menopause is coming on earlier.
Yeah, it is. Well, that's also environmental. And we've got earlier puberty is also environmental. Another subject.
But a lot of it is also you just haven't dropped eggs, right? Like if you don't drop it for every pregnancy, you don't drop eggs for a year.
Yeah.
And you've got 15 years of being pregnant, you're looking at a 10-year that's not even environmental. That's just about eggs.
So you're using your eggs quicker because you didn't go through periods. You didn't have 14 pregnancies where there was a pause on the egg release.
That's right.
Interesting.
So that's a structural reality. So we are dealing with, you and I and everyone else listening to your show, I imagine. Some people are through it and some people are probably not going to go through, or, if you don't have an ovulating body. But what I was going to say is we've got this dichotomy. Is it a dichotomy? We have this situation where our menopause is coming on earlier, but we're sort of in the workforce in this peak way. Mm-hmm. I'm still a hyper producer with my 48-year-old body. Yeah. I'm still in that age where I'm, fully engaged with my equivalent to bringing home the bacon,
right. So, I just on that, I actually have a theory that the most productive brain for a woman is the postmenopausal brain. It is as you transition into this grandmother hypothesis. And just for the sake of the conversation, doesn't mean you had to have kids. But based off of what Lisa said, based off the research that I'm looking at, the fact that the amygdala calms down, every postmenopausal woman will tell me, like, for some reason, I just don't give a fuck anymore about people pleasing. So your people pleasing skills go to the wayside. Your amygdala is not keeping you in the safety mode. It's moved more towards empathy, and your vision of the world becomes much broader because you go from I to more of a we state. And that's all based on this grandmother hypothesis. So I think what you're saying, and this is a part of what I want to bring back, is actually women as they age, that brain is the most productive and the most useful. So what you're saying makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. And I'm interested in that idea where when you are in the grandmother role, and I'm saying it with quotes because parents, we're talking about allo parenting.
Yeah.
And allo parenting, which is when any non-parent steps in to do the role of parenting, whether you are related or not. All traditional cultures have a solid role of allo parenting that is absolutely needing to be filled. That is your value. You see that as you are the resource. You yourself have become the resource. Yeah. Your attention giving, your presence, your eyes and ears on this other group of people is now your work. Yeah. So we're still working, but where you're doing your work is maybe less in the world of like, I don't need to step away and bring home the bacon, or I'm just using that as like a foraging step in, right? And now my bacon is at home and it's with these people, and that is my role. And so our brain is just sort of adapting to the new space that would secure survival, or at least be a big influence of survival for the group as a whole.
Well, and that's the grandmother hypothesis, is that we wouldn't have evolved out of the cave person day if the grandmother hadn't been there, and that she was necessary for the survival of the human species. And so then I look at her and I'm like, okay, well, what did she do? She had this brain that she could see a more collective view, so she could take care of the whole clan. But then she was also able to go out and forage for food. So I think today answered for me what physical skills we need as we get older, and they're very analogous to what the grandmother did. She had to bend down. She needed the flexibility. She needed to pull. She needed her hand strength. She had to walk. She probably had to carry something heavy. So all of your movement, diet, everything on the pyramid, to me, actually is now linking. That is what she needed as she got older so that our species could survive. And that is what's being tossed aside when we go into those postmenopausal years, because either women are so exhausted from, all the work they've put in their whole life. I hear that all the time. Or we're told, like, you're older now, you don't need to do as much. And yet what I'm hearing is actually we need to go back to what the primal grandmothers did and the primal aging women did.
Yeah. And I don't think there's that much difference between what the aging group was and the younger group was.
But
I think
maybe,
it's sort of very similar, like maybe you won't see sprinting, or you won't see it. I'm not sure, because they were talking about a lot of different groups and a lot of different cultures. But I think in general, unlike our perspective where movement starts high with young and tapers off, it's probably an on-ramp that stayed high all the way through.
Because she knew she had to, when she went through menopause, she had to
Because
know to protect the clan. She had to
what
move.
else are you going to do? Like,
Yeah,
you live out, like you,
that's
like,
a
I think
good
it's
point.
just like the idea, it wasn't a choice. Like, I just think these aren't choices. These are reflexes. These are just environmental pressures. So you stay mobile to do the things because that's what it takes.
Right.
You have to keep up what it takes.
Yeah. So what's also interesting about the nuance of this movement diet that you have now, I'm going to geek out and get all your books and because I really love the way you've framed this, is that in this current 2024, what we're hearing is menopausal women need more strength training. And as much as I agree with that, I feel like it's been a limitation of the conversation. And the grandmother hypothesis keeps popping in my mind. It was like, no, what did we need to stay alive postmenopausally? Well, we needed all these different skills that you have now beautifully put into this pyramid. So my next logical question, because we get this a lot in our community, where like 70 and 80-year-olds are like, really? Now I got to start lifting weights? I mean, my mom at 84 hasn't lifted a weight in decades. I'm thinking the healthiest way is to use this pyramid and say, are you hitting these marks on a daily, weekly basis? And if so, then my next question would be, do I need to go to the gym? What's the purpose of going to the gym?
Well, there's no requirement. Like, we do not need an athletic sport or fitness lens to get the movements our body needs because they've always been there. Now we all have individual lives that might make, or responsibilities that are in a modern context where we're using the gym as the only place where we can figure out where to get the movement, or, so you do not need it. But as a group of people, as humans, it's not necessary. However, it might be quite practical for more people. Like, I think about your mother, and in the book, I list lots of different activities for each one of these categories in many different contexts, because
beautiful.
Physicality isn't the only thing we need, right? We also need, like I said, community.
Yes.
We need to be with others. We need to have purpose.
Yep.
You need to identify what your purpose is and why you even care about moving your body. That's a big part of the workbook, is actually the identification of what is my movement why? Because if you have not identified your movement why, and if your movement why doesn't live outside of like external health information, the way our psychology works with being able to stay committed and motivated, and it doesn't work without that movement why. So when you're talking about your mother, swimming, getting into water is so there's like swimming laps, and that's climbing and clambering, but there's also water walking. There's water aerobics that bring in the big body strength training work, and you could do that in a pool if you're feeling particularly so movement malnourished that you need a slower on-ramp. We're all coming into this where we are in our body. It could be, we talk about grip strength. It could be holding a basket in your hand as you're fetching a few things from the grocery store instead of getting the automatic basket with wheels. It's walking to the library to return a book and carrying that load of books for just a little bit more than you would I'm going to walk a mile with my books on my back. I mean, that 1 mile walk could be someone else's air quote 3 to 5 mile walk. The fact that you've put it on your backpack, there's your big body worker you're carrying just because you put that load on your frame. And you think about your alignment, of course, and you're nice and upright while you do it. But it's very easy to get these things without the need for the gym, the exercise lens.
Right.
Because, of course, these are all activities of daily living.
Well, and I'll tell you, in the cultural zeitgeist right now, there's a lot of conversation around the connection between menopause and frozen shoulder. It's a very common thing to happen. And I think one of the things that's happening is it's not just the loss of estrogen, but we have people that are like extreme athletes that are really lifting heavy, and it becomes very one-dimensional. So this new perimenopausal generation is a little more active than like my mom's generation, for sure. Mm-hmm. And so what I look at this conversation through two lenses. I look at through my mother's lens and through the women that listen to this podcast that are like, in the 70s and 80s, maybe even the 60s, where movement wasn't, exercise wasn't really in vogue for women. So this is amazing. We just gave you a checklist of things to be able to do on your daily basis. But then I think of my friends in their 40s and friends that I would run with, friends that can no longer do that movement, friends that are injuring themselves in the gym, and they're frustrated because the injuries are mounting and they're in this menopausal moment. And I'm thinking, but wait, now your exercise, or what you've been calling exercise, has been so one-dimensional that you're now injured. So you need to come back to this movement diet and incorporate these other things so you can keep yourself fit. So your movement diet really, to me, applies to both of these generations, and just from a different lens.